Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamas Dumavidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are continuing with the complete works of Swami Ramakrishnananda, his chapter on morality as a factor in the progress of humanity. We're in the middle of this talk, and we're starting, if you're following along in a book, 333. The Kindle book is at page 370, and Atma will begin to read.
Examples are more than words. If you talk big and lead a very happy life, no one will hear you. But if you live an exemplary and moral life and do not talk and preach at all, it will be more than preaching 20,000 sermons. What is there in mere talk? Everyone can talk upon morality and religion, but far from being a moral man in the least, he may be the greatest of scoundrels. Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna well describes an ordinary man of the world when he says that a man can talk baskets of good things, but not one of these good things he can ever realize. So, there's no newness or interest in any talk here in this world. A practically good man is indeed a rarity here, and whatever is rare naturally creates an interest all around. People cannot but honor, revere, and worship such a man. A really good man, although he may be dumb all his life, does real good to the society in which he lives and moves. So my dear friends, if you want to improve your society, improve yourselves first by being moral and good. For as we have seen, morality and goodness alone can improve a man. There is no other way.
All right, let's continue.
Essentially, there is no difference between morality and religion. An immoral religious man is as impossible to imagine as the triangular circle. Religion consists in the renunciation of sensual pleasures. So also does morality. Morality raises a man from the kingdom of animals to the kingdom of God, and religion takes him by the hand and leads him into that kingdom and brings him face to face with God. Morality is the active side of religion. Its existence is in practice and not in theory. Man's higher religion consists in meditation and enjoyment of God when once he is admitted into that higher plane of morality. Morality is the gatekeeper of the kingdom of heaven, and higher religion is a guide in that kingdom to lead the man to God, who is the one eternal truth and bliss combined together.
Yes, and as I think we mentioned last time, we have to be a little cautious of just reading a book on morality laws or religious laws, because those things change from place to place and from time to time and from religion to religion. And, you can find sects that say you have to shave your head, and others say you can't cut your hair. So obviously this is not an essential part of religious practice. It's something that reminds you of your connection with your religious practice. And that's a good thing. You can do all sorts of practices to do that. Of course, the Jewish tradition is very big on that. They have all sorts of things that you do in remembrance of your covenant with God. And so all those things are very good. But it doesn't mean that those are the be-all and end-all of being moral or being religious. It's just the way the people in that particular religious tradition help themselves to remember God. And there are many ways to do that. So if you read say something, the laws of Manu or something, you'll find a lot of things that are very antiquated and perhaps suited for an earlier time, but not particularly suited for today. And so you have to be a little careful in being extreme about these things. You don't want to take something which someone says is a moral requirement that is really just something that was a cultural phenomenon at a particular time and place. And perhaps if you look at it as a way to remember God, then that has a value for you, but not necessarily something that would be universally found to be true. All right, let's continue with this next paragraph.
The path of morality is an uphill path, and therefore not so easy to travel. It requires an effort on the part of the traveler. It's easy to get angry, but it's difficult to restrain anger. It's easy to curse, but it's difficult to bless him who despitefully curses you. It is easy to love friends. It is difficult to pray for the well-being of one's own enemy. But we must always remember that there can be no royal road to moral perfection, as there is no royal road to geometry. To realize the highest end, we must struggle hard and always pray to God to help us. Says Jesus, ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. Heaven helps those who help themselves. The Father in heaven is always watching our works here with interest. And when he sees one of his children sincerely laboring to gain a certain end and not finding it, which always demands a little more strength from him, he stretches forth his helping hand and enables his child to reach his ideal. Such being the case, why should we lose our hearts, knowing that we have an ever-merciful and almighty Father always beside us to help us out of all difficulties and give us whatever we want?
Yes, you find this over and over again, this emphasis on yearning, the sincere yearning of the aspirant, and having faith that the answers will come. You may not, if you're asking for something specific, you may not get the answer that you want, because perhaps that's not in your best interest. And of course, there are all sorts of funny stories about that, like the couple that got 3 wishes, and they decided they didn't like their noses, so they got rid of their noses, and then they didn't have any noses. So then they wanted to have their face have beautiful noses on them, and they ended up with a face full of beautiful noses. So you see, if you're not careful of what you wish for, you end up in trouble. They ended up with their same old noses back with their 3rd wish. So that's just a funny story to indicate that you have to be careful what you wish for, and we don't always know what's good for us. And so the best prayer is to pray that your yearning and love for God is increased, and that you're following God's will, and that your will can be in alignment with God's will, rather than saying, oh, I wish I could do this, and please help me do that, and that kind of thing, and please get me this, and please get me that. You might find that once you've got it, you didn't need it, or it comes with some other uncomfortable side effect that you hadn't planned on. These are the key words that you find in all the great traditions, that you have to have sincere faith and sincere yearning. All right, let's go on.
Faith in God, my dear friends, is the surest and easiest means to make you great and good and morally perfect. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God, says the Bible. I'd rather believe all the fables and the legend and the Talmud and the Alcoran than that this universal frame is without a mind, says Bacon. Although Bacon, because he was a Christian, could not believe in all the fables of the Alcoran, as a Mohammedan should do. Yet he could not bring himself down to believe that this universal frame was without a mind. God appeared to him to be so self-evident. Looking at the creation, no sane man can bring himself to believe that there is no creator behind it. So if God is a reality, and if that God is all merciful and everywhere, is it not a matter of great advantage to us to achieve whatever is noble and high and great, since the ever-smiling, ever-helping God is ready to help us whenever we want? When I do a certain difficult action in the presence of one who can easily do that, and will readily help me to do it if I only ask him, I never get disheartened at seeing the difficulty of the work, but rather try my best to do the work myself without asking the help of my superior. I find a certain energy and alacrity in doing that difficult piece of business, instead of getting disheartened and being doubtful of my success. Such is the case with the man who has faith in God, who lives and moves and has his being in God, who knows God to be his nearest and dearest friend. So let us all be faithful servants of God, so that we may be great and good and make others great and good as well more easily than if we were to try to realize that highest ideal with our own limited capacity. So let us sing with Longfellow again. Trust no future, however pleasant. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the living present. Heart within and God on head.
All right, let's see. I should have stopped earlier when I could remember what I was going to say. Oh, yes, the fine-tuning. I think we actually talked about this earlier, so I think he tends to repeat the same ideas, so I guess I'm going to repeat the same ideas. This idea that Bacon believed in God because he looked at the universe and saw how magnificently tuned it was. And of course, we do see that. We see in physics, we find that the positive charges and the negative charges just balance exactly. And the angular momentum this way and the angular momentum that way just balance exactly. And all the laws of physics are just in the finest balance so that everything works just right. And then you find in the kingdom of the living, you find that the animals and plants live in this incredible web of interconnectedness. And you find flowers that can only be pollinated by one insect, and an insect that can only get its nourishment from one flower, and a bird that has just the right tongue to get the nectar out of a particular flower, and so forth and so on. All of these incredible interconnections that happen in nature, and how even though there's also a lot of competition in nature, it's also a dog-eat-dog world out there in Mother Nature. Everything has to fight for its right in the sun, you could say. And so plants are maneuvering to get to the sunlight, and sometimes they'll shade out some of their weaker neighbors, and animals are hunting prey, and the strong ones get the prey and the weak ones don't. So there's a lot of competition out there in nature as well. But there's also a lot of incredibly intricate and fine tuning of how things work. And when you think of all of what goes into just making one cell, one living cell, you know that if you read any of the attempts of trying to create life in the chemistry lab, well, you find out they have to go at it, they're going after it from several different angles. Some people will look at the cell membrane and they say, well, the first thing that would have to be synthesized would be the cell membrane. How could a cell membrane be synthesized? And so they look at some, well, like soap. You know, soap has a water-philic end, a water-loving end, and a water-hating end. And so it repels water on one side and attracts it on the other. So if you form a loop of it, then you can get an area inside that's all watery and protected from the outside. And so that's the beginning of an idea for a cell membrane. And so all of the things that would have to come together to get a cell membrane. And then when you think of what a small step that is, then you've got to figure out how do you get ribonucleic acid or DNA. and how do you line up all the sugars and all the bases so that they all pair up? It's just incredible. And then amino acids, you have to synthesize amino acids. They got all excited when they could create a few amino acids in a primordial soup with some electrical charges through the kinds of chemical compounds that are believed to be in the early universe, which is magnificent. We do see that amino acids are created that way. But you think of the complex nature of the amino acids that have to be created to create even one protein is quite incredible. So the universe is quite a magnificent affair, as Sir Francis Bacon says. All right, well, that concluded that chapter of Swami Ramakrishnananda. And the next chapter is going to be the control of the senses. Oh, and I meant to say that he was saying there's no royal road to geometry, but being an old geometry teacher, I think the road to geometry is royal. But I don't think most of my students felt that way. All right, let's go on.
Control of the senses. What are these senses? They're nothing in themselves. It is we who have given them their power. But they've had it for ages, so they take it as their own. Now, when we would conquer them, they rise up and make us slaves. This, however, is really the fault of the man himself. When he's able to understand clearly that the senses are the cause of all his misery, then he can very easily put them down. That realization does not come without a struggle. The man continues to linger here expecting something good, something great from the world, and so long as he thinks in this way, he will not realize that through the senses, no true happiness can come. He must first learn to distinguish the real from the unreal, good from bad, and then take only the good. Thus he will gradually rise above the senses.
And of course, I always like to say that they're not really sense organs, they're nonsense organs. They're projecting something on this, the screen of Brahman. They're projecting this world of Maya. And the world of Maya is a kind of an inscrutable magic show out there. And so the senses only give us a particular slant on things, and they often give us misinformation. We can often misperceive things. And you can go on the internet and look for visual paradoxes and illusions. And there are all sorts of interesting examples of looking at various things that perhaps there are brick patterns that make it look like the lines between the bricks are crooked, and they're not crooked. If you fool with perspective, you can draw a room, or you can build a room and make it look like one person's only half the size of the other person, just because the room is this peculiar shape. It's not, you expect the room to be rectangular, and it's not. Some of the walls are larger than the other, and so then you're fooled into thinking that the person standing in the part of the room that's got large walls is tiny, and the one that's standing in the part of the room with smaller walls is gigantic. But all the time you're being fooled into thinking it's a rectangular room, and it's not. So all sorts of strange things that our sense organs do to us. All right, let's see how he handles this problem.
When you can bring your senses under your control, they can be made to lead you to God. These very energies which have led you away from the Lord may now take you to him. But the senses are very delusive. Even the highest man is sometimes dragged down by them to the lowest plane of sensuality. For this reason, you must wage an incessant war against them. There's no other way. For the man who wants to realize the truth, the first duty should be to put down the senses and, fixing his mind on the Lord, to regard him as the highest. Why do you turn to the senses? because you want to go where you will always be happy. And you think that your senses will lead you there. You imagine that one place or one thing will make you the happiest, and you start at once to go to it. When this idea comes and you run towards the object of your desire, nothing then can check you. Why? Because you regard that to be the highest, and the senses, you believe, will help you to get it. The senses, however, merely obey you. They are not to blame. You yourself are at fault. Shri Krishna now comes and says, my dear friend, you have seen all these things in the universe. And the universe is a place of infinite variety. Of all that is to be found here, the highest and most desirable thing is the Lord. When you can understand this very clearly by means of comparison, that he is the highest and the best, at that moment, all your sense energies will rush towards him.
And of course, this world is sort of like a maze of mirrors, and you see things, and you try to go towards them, and you find that you're frustrated. You're not ending up going towards them. Or if you find them, then you find that you find some other reflection, and you think that might even be better. And so then you try to go towards that. But all the time you're trying to go towards a reflection. So in that sense, everything in the universe reflects the infinite, undivided, unchanging reality that's behind it, but we don't see it that way. We see it as it is. We think it's as it looks to us. And that's why we say that the senses are deceiving us, because we don't realize that it's really simply Brahman in disguise, and it's the Brahman behind it that is attracting us, and not the object as it appears. All right, let's go on.
The mind always aspires after the biggest, the highest, the greatest. If you put down a 10 rupee note and beside it a 100 rupee note, it will take the 100 rupees. If beside the 100 rupee note you place a 1,000 rupee note, it will take the 1,000 rupees. If someone tells you the great wealth is to be found in a certain place, at once you will give up your present modest income and run there. The same way, when you realize that nothing is so beautiful as God, nothing is so great as God, nothing is so good or so kind as God, when you grasp this as you do the value of the 1,000 rupees over the 10 and 100 rupees, you will rush towards God. And then you will say, do I desire wisdom? God is my wisdom. Do I want wealth? God is my wealth. Do I want learning? God is my learning. Do I seek a home? Where shall I be at rest? Then God shall be my home, my place of rest. The moment you feel this in your heart of hearts, then even if you're a little child like Dhruva, you will be able to do great things, because his mother told him that God was in the jungle. He entered it without doubt or fear, for a little child never doubts his mother's words. When he saw the lions and tigers, he was not afraid. He only thought that God was playing with him by coming in such strange forms. So he began to talk to them, and because he was not afraid, they did not harm him. So it is with you. If you understand clearly that the Lord is the highest, then nothing will frighten or discourage you. All your senses will run in the direction of the Supreme, and both your mind and your senses will help you to reach him.
Yeah, I found that with dogs too. If you approach a home that has dogs and they're out loose, they come barking at you, you just turn and say, oh, hi, are you the greeting committee? And you smile, and they kind of look like, oh, well, I guess I don't have to bark at you. So that works even with dogs. So, all right, let's go on.
Where is God? He is where the world is not. When after studying the universe, you realize that it has come out of a great all-wise being, then you think, I must go to him and get a little of that wisdom. And to go to him, you must go away from the universe. Whether he is extra-cosmic, or intracosmic makes no difference. For in either case, you will have to go out of the universe. You cannot take two things. You must take the one or the other. If you wish to go to God, you will have to turn your back on the world. These senses, when outgoing, lead you to creation. But you wish to go to God, therefore you must indraw your senses. They must be controlled and turned in the opposite direction. He is seated in the heart, so all your sense energies, all your mental energies must converge to that one point and take you there. But this can be done only when you realize that He is the best, the highest in the whole universe. Thou art my Father, Thou art my mother, Thou art my friend, Thou art my companion, Thou art my learning, Thou art my wealth, Thou art my all in all, my one Lord.
And of course, as we've heard the great Swami say, that once you've realized God, first you have to sort of do neti, not this. But then once you've realized God, it's eti, everything is God, everything is Brahman. You see Brahman within everything. But it's good to go through the initial stage of remembering that the apparent reality that you're observing is a false impression, and that you want the reality behind that. And then once you realize the reality behind that, then you can experience the divinity of the manifestation itself. All right.
God's ego, God's spirit, God's self are all one and the same, for they are all infinite, and there cannot be two infinities. Our Atman, the self, and our ego are diametrically opposed, because one is infinite and the other is finite. For this reason, God is called the Paramatman, or Supreme Self. If you would control your senses and your mind, you must look upon Him as the Supreme Self and love Him with all your heart and soul. The perverse tendency of the senses will be controlled at that moment. And instead of leading you to the outside creation and to death, they will lead you inward to God. So you see that when you regard God as the highest, you can easily learn to control the senses. When you have controlled your senses, you know who you are. And when you know who you are, you realize that the universe rests in you, that it has no basis except in you, and that you are beyond birth and death.
Yes, this idea that there can't be two infinities, only one. Always, having studied, again, mathematics, it becomes a bit of a problem. And you have to think that this is coming at it from a different standpoint. This is infinity in the some sort of absolute sense, because in mathematics you have all sorts of infinities. For example, you can have what's called countably infinite, and the counting numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and etc. is an infinite set. But the set of even numbers is equally infinite. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, it goes on forever. And you can pair them up with the counting numbers. There's the first even number, and the second even number, and the third even number. No problem. So in mathematics, they say those sets have the same size. And then you come into rational numbers, all the numbers that can be created by taking fractions of two integers. And you can show that those actually have, that set has the same size as the counting numbers. That sounds very peculiar, but you can set up sort of a grid and pair them up going kind of this way. And you can show that the rational numbers, or the fractions, are countably infinite. And then you end up with uncountably infinite sets. So you have another kind of infinity. The numbers between 0 and 1 are uncountably infinite. There are more numbers, more real numbers between 0 and 1 than there are counting numbers. There's no way to match up the counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth, with all the possible real numbers between 0 and 1, the rational and the irrational numbers. And so you get all these peculiar ideas about infinity in mathematics. So there are different kinds of infinities. But of course, here he's talking about the ultimate infinity of the entire universe. So we'll have to leave the mathematical models behind. All right, let's go on.
How does attachment come? How did the senses become outgoing? That man who makes much of sensual enjoyment, who thinks that out of sounds, forms, and touches alone enjoyment can come, naturally becomes attached to these, just as when gum is on the table. If something is laid on it, the object will stick to it. A man thinks, I want to be happy only in the world, and nowhere else can I be happy. And out of this belief, attachment for the world springs up. So long as these feelings hold him, he will be tied to the world by a strong cord of attachment, and he will not be able to get away from it. As a result of this attachment, desires come into existence. Then when something rises in the way and prevents the fulfilling of these desires, he grows angry. When a man becomes angry, he loses the power of discrimination between right and wrong. His egotism goes to such a length that he thinks nothing even of insulting his superiors or the guru, to whom he is so much beholden. Thus, egotism, which in itself is such a puny thing, under the influence of anger, can become greatly inflated. There's no worse delusion than this. That moment a man perpetrates the worst kind of evil without any compunction whatever. Then when that unnatural condition leaves him, he himself will have to repent. So man is the cause of his own death. But since this detention comes through attachment, we should give up attachment.
It's so true that if you're angry, it's not the time to confront somebody. You need to cool down and think more calmly before you decide to engage somebody in a discussion or a disagreement or an argument. Because if you act while you're really angry, you usually will say something stupid and make things worse rather than resolving anything. You simply don't think clearly when you're angry. Angry really does cloud your decision-making ability. The neurochemistry of the brain changes when you get angry, and some of the rational processes get derailed during that time. And so it really is important to watch that. I remember a master teacher telling me that when I was beginning teaching. He said, if you really feel angry, don't try to discipline the class. Calm down first, or you'll be sorry. All right, so let's go on.
We should give up attachment. Now, how are we to do this? We should neither like nor dislike anything.
Where did you go? Let's see, I lost you.
When the senses have been freed from liking and disliking, then, if the man enjoys the world with their help, they will never bring evil to him. Rather, he will have a certain power, a certain satisfaction in his mind. He who has been able to bring his mind under his control by the above method, such a man will be able to realize within himself perfect peace and contentment.
I'm still not following you. What happened here?
Did I skip?
I don't know, the paragraph didn't. How do we do these things? Is that where your paragraph started?
Let me check.
Yeah.
Yeah, how are we to do this?
How do we do this? All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead, let's repeat it. Okay. Can you repeat that paragraph? How are we to do this?
Oh. We should give up attachment. Now, how are we to do this? We should neither like nor dislike anything. When the senses have been freed from liking and disliking, then if the man enjoys the world with their help, they will never bring evil to him. Rather, he will have a certain power, a certain satisfaction in his mind. He who has been able to bring his mind under his control by the above method, such a man will be able to realize within himself perfect peace and contentment. And what will be the result of this peace and contentment? In that contented condition of mind, he will never commit a blunder. When the mind is restless, it cannot think properly, and one commits all sorts of mistakes. But not so the other man. His intellectual faculties are very clear. He sees all. He knows the true nature of things, what he should leave and what he should accept, and he realizes the truth.
And of course, that's the value of having a meditation practice. People find that if you meditate even for a short time in the morning and in the evening, it helps to sort of reset your brain into a calmer situation so that you think more clearly. You put your brain in the habit of having those brain waves that bring a peace and calmness about it. And under that condition, you think more clearly. Even these success gurus that teach you how to be successful in business and all that sort of thing, will tell you that if you want to come up with creative ideas, or if you have a particular problem to solve in the workplace or for your business, and you're trying to figure out a solution, it's best to calm your mind and go out and sit in a nice quiet place, and they'll suggest maybe sitting out in nature or someplace like that. But it works perfectly well to go into a church or a temple or a synagogue and just quiet the mind, and don't try to solve the problem. Just try to calm the mind and think clearly and bring yourself into a state of greater relaxation and peace. And the mind is then able to process things in a more orderly fashion than it could if you're very anxious to get something solved. If you're too anxious about it, that will then make it difficult for the mind to come up with a solution. Now, it's also, of course, sometimes useful to have a great one-pointedness of desire to do something, but it can't be done in a state of agitation. It has to be one-pointed desire in a state of calmness, and so there's a difference there. All right, let's go on.
This can be done only if we can free the senses from undue likings and dislikings. It's because control of the mind and of the senses will bring us peace and contentment. And through these, we shall attain to the realization of the truth that Sri Krishna tells us in the Gita, that our buddhi, or intellect, must be clear. We commit blunders and mistake one thing for another because our buddhi is confused. The mind is covered with dross. If a man wishes to achieve success in any walk of life, his intellectual faculties must be very clear. A man who has no control over his body, no control over his mind, such a man is very dull. His intellectual faculties are clouded, and he confounds everything, taking a friend for a foe, the wrong for right. He cannot think relevantly on any subject for a minute. How can such a dull, uncontrolled man be peaceful? How can such a restless mind be happy?
You know, when it talks about clearing the booty, it reminds me of computers. You have to clear your computer by rebooting, rebooting your booty, because otherwise your computer starts to collect all sorts of junk files and files that you've been looking at but you're no longer interested in, and they just kind of accumulate, and pretty soon your computer gets slower and slower and slower, and it doesn't work as well. And it's the same thing with your mind. If your mind is too cluttered with too many thoughts, it doesn't think very clearly. All right.
Whenever you fully enjoy any sort of pleasure, even sensual pleasure, for the time being, restlessness leaves the mind. You're happy. So long as the mind is restless, it's unhappy. When there is rest, there is happiness. We must not be undisciplined. We must not let the mind and senses rule over us. We must rule over them. Otherwise, we can never be happy, and we shall make all those about us as unhappy too. Just as the pilot who is at the mercy of the wind is lost, so the man who is at the mercy of the senses is lost. The senses steal away all peace from a man, as the wind steals away the boat from the shore and sinks it in mid-ocean. As long as you are held by any one of these senses, as long as you care for good food or sweet sounds or beautiful sights, you cannot hope to fix your mind on God. You will have to go out of the creation first. And when you go out of the creation, where must you go? To the Creator. The more you can take your mind and senses away from the world and fix them on God, the more you will find peace and happiness. And this can most easily be done by realizing through discrimination and experience that God is the highest and most desirable thing in this universe.
And that ends that section. I remember John Dobson used to talk about the nature of the world as being made of frustration. And so if you look at how the world is structured and how we tend to work in the world, we tend to want peace, love, and freedom. Those are three things that we want. If you look at the complete works of either Swami Vivekananda or Swami Abhedananda or some of the writings of the other direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, you will notice that they mention those three words a lot. They get mentioned a lot. And in Swami Vivekananda, you will say, in one place he'll say everything is love, and another place it says everything is searching for freedom. Everything is searching for peace. So the difficulty is, of course, when we try to do that in this world of Maya, it's like that maze of mirrors. You go after it and you can't really get to it. And it's because the others tend to get in its way. When we go after peace, how do we do it? Well, we wage war. That doesn't seem to work terribly well, does it? If you feel lonely and you fall in love, and so you feel a oneness, but then you don't have the independence you had before, and so you're not as free as you were before. If you go for freedom, then you feel more lonely, and you've got that problem. And all of these things, then, of course, because of the conflicts, bring worries, and that lessens your peacefulness. And so these things tend to conflict with each other when you seek them in the ordinary things of the world. But if you go towards God, you don't have to go toward three things. You just have to go toward God, and you get all of them. You get a love for God, you get a peaceful feeling, and you feel free and liberated because you realize that you're not bound to this little body-mind complex, but that you are that infinite, undivided, unchanging reality that is forever free and forever blissful and forever at one with everything in the universe. And so you get all of it in one package. But if you do it in the world, you try to go over one, and you might get more of one than the other, but then you'll find that you've got less of one of the other two. And so it goes on like that, and then you think, well, maybe I better try this, and then you run into some other difficulty. So, all right, well, that's probably a good place to start. No, not enough time to start a new chapter, so we will close with that. And next week, we will be reading Thinking Naturally of Oneself. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, Peace.
Sleep.